Hello and welcome to Making Revenue Tick. Delighted to be joined this week by Kartik. Hello, Kartik.
Hey Rick, how's it going? It's nice to be back here on this platform.
I know, right? We had you on for the podcast to tell your career story, and now we've got you on because we've got a topic we want to share with people, which we'll get into in just a moment. But for people who haven't yet had the opportunity to meet you, could you briefly explain a bit about who you are and the type of organizations that you've made a career out of helping?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So just a brief introduction. My name is Kartik Gade. I've been in technology sales for close to 2 decades at this moment in time, and my journey spanned from being an IC and a sales leader across large public enterprise companies, scale-ups, and more recently startups. And it's something I found a lot of interest in kind of being in the startup space. And currently, I'm enjoying being an advisor to multiple startups, working very closely with the executive team, helping them develop, mature, operationalize their go-to-market strategies.
And where are you in the world?
I'm based in California near San Francisco.
Okay, wonderful. I'm in sunny England without the sunny bit. So let's bring some Californian sunshine to this pod. So when we obviously had you on to tell your career story, I think there was so much depth behind what you were talking about, and a bunch of the frameworks like CARE in terms of hiring really stuck with me. And so when we had our follow-up, we spoke about there is a load of insights you've got from this 20-year career that I think we could bring to people that's highly relevant. It's not stuff that you're going to learn in a book that, was a bestseller 20 years ago. It's stuff that's really happening today. And that topic was about reimagining the role of revenue teams. And so we'll talk about that in just a second in terms of the things we're going to cover. But I just wanted the listeners to sort of get a behind the scenes view of that conversation. What is it about this topic and about how the role of revenue teams has changed that made it such an interesting topic that you thought would be worth covering here today?
Yeah, I think it's purely based on experiences and what I'm seeing in the market right now. Look, a lot of my work's been with startups. I do still have a very healthy network in large enterprise companies based on my time there. So I do have conversations as to how they run their businesses now. But I think my thoughts and kind of takeaways are more based from kind of the scale of a startup standpoint, right?
Sure.
We have a lot of startups. There's a lot of expectations on how we scale up. And I think it's really, really important to build the right business model to make sure that you start on the right path and it becomes a part of the culture, it becomes part of the discipline, and that everybody believes in it, right? I think it's more important for a smaller company to buy into the vision and how you kind of go to market as compared to probably a larger established environment. So that's kind of where this is coming from. And I think a lot of key learnings have come in the last 5 to 7 years, but more importantly, even in the last 12 months, as I've thought about how the sales motion has changed, right? I think that includes a conversation about how the buyer profile has changed, how we go to market. So that you have to take into account. And, and I wouldn't say the customer journey is flipped on its head. It's evolved a little bit, but how you think about the different pieces of the customer journey, that's changed.
Sure. Okay, understood. And there's lots for us to get into. We'll dive into each of those areas in just a second. I suppose the biggest problem that I can see with this, and I know that we've spoken about this, is that it's really easy when you're building a revenue organization to create silos and gaps, which mean that it's difficult for people working inside the business, but it makes it a very unpleasant, messy, often slow and overcomplicated experience for customers who are trying to interact with your business. And when you're trying to scale, potentially without the same resources, or definitely without the same resources as large organizations, those gaps and silos can really stunt your growth, potentially much worse in terms of the implication. So on that topic of gaps and silos, from your experience, why is that such a pertinent problem that we're seeing in the market today?
Yeah, so I mean, what I believe personally is that sales is a team sport, and more so now than it was historically. I think historically it was like you have your sales team, your job is to go sell, you'll be fed leads, whatever it may be. That's marketing's job. Don't talk to them about it, don't worry about it. Yeah. And then once you sell it, don't worry about it. Customer success will take over, right? Unless you have to come back and do an expansion sale.
Sure.
I think as we have evolved and the technologies around us have evolved in the digital world, uh, it's about the user experience. So here we're talking about the customer experience journey as well, right?
Yeah. Right.
So it can't be so stop. So it can't be like, hey, my interactions were with this one person, now it's with somebody else, now it's with somebody else. And there's
Sure.
been no communication between the internal team as to what that journey is.
Yeah.
So I think this will resonate with a lot of go-to-market leaders is customers get annoyed because they get asked the same question about their business across that customer journey,
Sure.
right? The very first time an account team gets in front of whoever the customer might be, I would tell me what your problems are, what's going on, tell me about your environment. Then either the product team or engineering team will get involved. It's for some point or reason, they'll ask the same questions. And then at the time of implementation, if you're successful in closing the deal, they'll ask the same question. The services team will ask the same question. So how do you kind of streamline that? That's number one, right? So
Sure.
you're more aware of the, just a relationship based on, hey, you're a vendor and you're a customer. It becomes more of an advisory role because the customer identifies that you truly know them inside out. There has been work that's been done at the back end.
Sure.
And then they start seeing you more from an advisory capacity. So, everybody talks about him being an advisor to your customer, but then is the foundation in place for your employees to be that advisor to that customer? And that's where it's important to kind of remove some of these silos that we're going to be talking about.
Yeah. Okay. Makes perfect sense. Yeah. There's probably nothing more frustrating than having to repeat yourself over and over again when the big message that technology was going to, solve for us in the last few years was this hyper personalization, right? If you think about the example I think about when I think about technology and hyper personalization is that Minority Report film, when he's walking down and it's like a tailored advert for him, which is kind of like how we think that hyper personalization and advertising should be, but that doesn't reflect in terms of the reality of how people are actually going through experiences with brands. And like you said, that customer journey and the buyer journey has changed, and we do expect that, right? We expect that that about us, particularly if we've spent the time to tell you about it.
Yep.
So it's that let's talk about the customer journey. Who does that? So who in startup to scale is responsible? Which teams are responsible for actually creating and designing that customer journey?
Yeah, so I think before we kind of go into what teams define the customer journey, let's talk about what the customer journey looks like, right?
Yeah,
and I'm going to do a comparison as to my take on what the customer journey was 5-7 years ago to what I believe it is today, right?
Sure. Okay.
So, if you were to build it, break it into stages, customer journey maybe a couple of years ago was about awareness of the product, consideration of the product against the competition or, the status quo. Then you go through the sales cycle, the evaluation, the negotiation, and the close.
Yeah.
Then the journey turns into retention, right? Okay, they've been using a product for 12 months, 24 months. How do we retain them? And then it's about advocacy. It's like, okay, can we continue to advocate the benefit and the value of the product it is? I think because the buyer profile has changed, I think sort of those parts have moved around, right? So I think awareness and advocacy come together now, right? So yes, it's a product that brings us an amount of value, but do you have thought leadership in the area, right? If you were to take AI, for example, in today's world, ChatGPT made Gen AI the thing last year, and now all they want to talk about from a technology perspective is Gen AI, right? But how you leverage, deploy, and understand what that is very different, right? So when you have a product in the space, then you have to have an understanding of what value it's bringing to the customers, and you have to be that thought leadership. And that's where advocacy comes in, right?
Sure.
You have to bring awareness and advocacy at the same time as to your idea, your product, or whatever it is the right thing as compared to, 70 other companies with the same exact messaging around cost optimization and being more efficient and things like that.
Yeah.
And how you drive advocacy and thought leadership changes that model of potential customer acquisition. It impacts whether you drive a bottom-up motion or a top-down motion or something in the middle, right? Yeah. So I think that's where it's important. So historically, awareness was marketing's job. It was like, great, marketing is going to do there. It's going to run some campaigns. They're going to probably work with marketing to put some messaging out there. and then we're going to get some leads and work on. Now what's happening is because you have to drive this advocacy, I don't think it's just marketing's role, right? You need more involved input from the product side as well. Potentially even early on from a go-to-market sales perspective, because you want to understand what you're hearing back from the field. And that advocacy and that messaging evolves as a result of that, kind of collaboration. More often than not, what happens when we get an email from a marketing person or a salesperson, it usually goes to the spam folder. But if you get something from the product leader, which is meaningful, which brings a certain amount of thinking through it, rather than just like, hey, IOS, because we can help you XYZ, that changes the narrative. So the kind of information you put out there is also going to be very, very different as a result of that. So as you can already see, suddenly it just went from marketing to like marketing product, probably even some external parties who are seen as thought leaders in the space get involved, right? So it's not just the one team, now it's multiple teams being involved in that journey.
Yeah, sure.
Right. So that's just one example.
Yeah, it makes sense. I'm just thinking from a hiring perspective. So if you're talking about, it's now more people's jobs to interact and create that advocacy after awareness has been created, does that change fundamentally the type of person that you need to hire in a modern revenue organization if you're a startup and scale up?
I think you need to hire somebody who's willing to work alongside the other leaders, right? I think it has to start at an executive leadership position or a senior leadership position.
Yeah.
And there has to be synergies, and more often than not, people still tend to stay in their own kind of, silos, like marketing stays in marketing, sales stays in sales, and kind of go about their day-to-day business.
Yeah.
But high-functioning teams have a really close collaboration and relationship between the leaders across various teams, right?
Yeah.
They understand each other's roles. They understand each other's KPIs, because those are important from a business perspective, and they understand each other's pain points. And so they start helping each other out more closely, right? They work closely to pivoting. Usually, I'll give you an example. I was at working with a startup recently where they had a messaging, and it was a messaging by the product organization and the marketing saying, "Hey, we do X," and it wasn't resonating because the number of leads weren't coming in. So it was really important, because the sales team, the field team was getting a little frustrated because they weren't getting what they needed out of it. So there was a conversation to pivot, and the sales team started pivoting on the message and going to market themselves, but then there wasn't the support or the foundation behind it to scale it out, right? And it started working because whoever they would reach out to, they were getting responses, but then the scale out wasn't as big. And the biggest challenge there was they went at it alone rather than saying, hey, it's not working. Here's what we want to try out or experiment with. If it works, we would want the rest of the team to come along with us. Product team to be part of that journey, because it changes how you present the product, and then marketing collateral changes. And there's a lot of effort, and nothing to take away from a marketing standpoint. There's a lot of effort that goes into putting out collateral and content and things like that, what Hollis used to do. But if you work in your own islands, then you're not allowed. At the start of at a startup or a scale up, you want to have processes that are repeatable, relatable, and scalable, right? But if you live in your own islands, you cannot build that across an organization, right? What works for you might not work for them. So you have to have that alignment.
Sure.
And when you have that alignment, you start interacting with the customer in a very different way. You're engaging at different levels of a sales cycle. For example, who engages at various parts of the sales cycle also varies, right? Historically, sales cycle was, there's an SDR involved, and there's qualification that happens. Then the account executive or the salesperson takes over. They probably bring in a pre-sales engineer to talk to the technical talk, the demo, the POC, whatever. And then if all goes well, somehow, then you close a deal, and then you pass it on to the customer success team or the services organization around implementation, and so on and so forth. But if you were to engage, and if it's a meaningful strategic account to kind of focus on from a short-term and long-term perspective, Now, when we bring in somebody from the product team to be that conduit to help build that technical relationship, but a technical leader on their side, right? As you go through the evaluation of the POC process, get somebody from customer success to be a part of that journey so they understand the nuances of what works, doesn't work in the customer environment. So when they do end up buying things, you already have that information rather than starting from the ground saying, oh, it didn't work because that integration wasn't available, or there were these other interdependencies that we weren't aware of. So when you customer signed, they're excited about using your technology, and then they just keep hitting roadblock after roadblock around implementation. But if you start understanding those nuances from the very start, it should be a lot smoother.
Yeah, sure. Makes sense. I was wondering if we could make this real for people. You talked about the example from the startup that you were working with. What sort of specific feedback are you hearing, either from the internal teams that there's something that's broken, that they're not getting the result, there's like things that are happening, or what examples are you hearing directly from customers about their frustrations? Can you paint some like real scenarios for us that make it come to life?
A lot of people probably laugh when I say this, but the biggest challenge that salespeople have is like, hey, when we go out with a message that's been provided to us, it's not resonating. Not enough people are responding to us on it, or in a meaningful manner, or the right audience. So there's a lot of noise that comes with it, and then time management and where to focus becomes an issue, right? Sure. So that's definitely a concern. And ask me the second part of the question again. Sorry.
Is there feedback? Yeah, are you hearing direct feedback from customers? So you're talking about how customers, the buyer journey is changing, how there's benefit of doing it in this new modern way. What specific examples are you hearing from customers about their frustration?
Yeah, so it's, so there's a couple of aspects to it, right? When you go back to that advocacy aspect to it, in the customer journey, you're providing that thought leadership. You're probably providing them some sort of a reference architecture as to how they should go about deploying it. See, we expect that our customers know everything and the best way to fix, their problems, but there's interdependencies that they may not be aware of in, driving that. So when you go through that proper qualification, that discovery journey, where if you're doing a POC and somebody from customer success has done multiple implementation, comes in and starts asking those questions, the customer themselves start becoming aware of what the interdependencies are, right? So when the time comes for them to deploy, they have whoever else within their organization already engaged in the conversation. Maybe it even starts from a decision-making standpoint of purchasing or not purchasing, because you need other people to buy into that journey rather than buying into it and then later realizing that there's so many, bottlenecks to move forward. So I think that's kind of where the customer frustration comes from, because now they've put their neck on the line. They've said, okay, hey, I'm going to champion this solution to be leveraged in our company, but we're unable to use it. And 7 months later, they have to go back and justify it from a budgeting standpoint as to why they should continue to use that.
Sure. Yeah, excellent point. So let's get really specific then in terms of the actual problems that these silos cause. So what's the problems, and how does that actually happen?
I think if you want to give the customer that seamless journey, everybody speak the same language, everybody speak the same value proposition. I think that's where you need to be working together, right? You could hear messaging A from team A, but messaging B from team B, then something gets lost in translation there. So that's important. It definitely impacts the customer journey, like or their experience, if I can put it as such, right? It's not very straightforward. The buyer profile has already done their research in today's world, right? They're not relying on your messaging. They've gone out and figured out as to, I'm going to evaluate company A, B, and C, and here are my reasons for evaluating these three, but not the other five, right? So from that standpoint, from a buyer profile standpoint, they look at that. Like, how easy is it to do that business, right? How easy is it for me to understand it? How easy is it for me to look at what this long-term vision of this solution is? And a long-term vision not necessarily be provided from a sales standpoint. It has to be provided from a product standpoint, right? So if that disconnect exists, right? If it goes like, oh yeah, here's a roadmap presentation, have your sales engineer present it. Yes, possibly. But then there's questions that come up Then we go, okay, hey, let me get back to you on those questions that have just come up. Then you go back to the product team. So there's a possibility of your sales cycle getting elongated as a result of this back and forth, right? A lot of companies selling into the enterprise struggle with long sales cycles because of this back and forth. And a lot of sales leaders are always trying to figure out, how do I shrink that sales cycle? How do I drive a higher deal velocity? So if we have certain steps in place that drives routine and discipline, right? Now, I'm not saying the product team needs to be on every sales call. That doesn't make sense. It's not scalable. But where it makes sense, based on the stage, based on the dollar amount, whatever it may be, or the logo, then hopefully what usually takes 5 emails and 3 phone calls can hopefully be tackled in 1 phone call.
Sure.
Right. So hopefully you're shrinking that 6-week communication into 1 week, maybe 2 weeks.
Sure. Makes sense. So, and then I was thinking about the role of then the product team. So we hear all the time that they want, our clients, when they're hiring revenue leaders, they want them to be very collaborative with the product team, because they're still trying to find market fit.
Yeah.
They're still trying to improve their product. Maybe they're developing new products, but it's certainly very much a case that the feedback sales are going to hear from prospects as well as from customers are fundamental to the design and improvement and the development roadmap of products. So the modern role of the product team, do you see that as being able to get more out of what they already have today? Or is it just as much about actually helping to, and I suppose in that example, trying to get repeatability of sales, so you can get something that's really going and rinse and repeat, versus this kind of alternative, which is that there's customization and changes happening to create the perfect solution for each customer. So what's that line between making sure that the product is delivered as it is versus we're bringing innovations back into the business to help improve the product?
Yeah, so you bring up a great point, right? So when you're talking about product market fit, for that specific thing, you have to kind of evolve based on those conversations, right? So you have to continue to make some tweaks to the product based on, it could be integrations, it could be some feature functionalities that, again, it has to be something that multiple customers need, not just what one customer needs. So you start looking for patterns, right? So if you start looking for patterns in those conversations, say, okay, great, out of 100 customers, 50, 60, 70 want this, it's something we should be focused on. And then that goes into the roadmap. That roadmap enables the sales organization to say, okay, hey, here's how we will continue to bring value to you beyond, the initial conversation, right?
Yeah, sure.
So our product is evolving to continue to solve whatever new problems that you're finding on your side to the customer. It also will help them understand what the mindset is, or what the mindset shift is on the customer side. I don't need to tell you, especially from a technology perspective, if your product came out 6 months ago, it's ancient, right? Because somebody else has come up with something supposedly better, right? And I've gone into so many conversations in an advisory role, or when I was leading a sales organization, where we talk to a prospect and go like, yeah, but that's not really a problem. Like that was so 12 months ago. Well, the reality is, no, it's still today's problem, but you just have to kind of evolve with it a little bit. So I think it helps the product team understand what the customer mindset is. Like, see, when we pull in, when the product team comes out and we say, hey, we're going to market, there's a hypothesis built around what the problem statement is. We talked to a couple of people, but is that problem statement scalable? Number one, across multiple organizations. Is it compelling enough to work on? Number two, and number three, is it a short-term fix or a long-term fix? And a lot of startups, for the most part, be like, okay, great, we're going to solve today's problem. But where you, again, go back on that customer journey, that retention conversation, is what is a long-term vision and what is a long-term problem we're going to be solving for them, right? And that's where, when you, especially in today's world, when you start looking at startups and funding, that's where the challenge is. Everybody gets seed funding, maybe even Series A, but then the time it comes down, suddenly there's a huge dip in the number of companies that survive because that long-term strategy doesn't happen, because they haven't thought through that retention piece till after the fact, right?
Yeah.
Or most companies even go into in their third year seeing a significant dip off in the customers that they had. Suddenly there's like 20% churn, which isn't great.
Sure.
So retention also comes not post-sale. Retention has to be continuous through that customer journey as well. So you
Yeah,
have to
sure.
start thinking about it very early.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. My brain jumps then to like, we have a program in England called Dragon's Den. I know you've got Shark Tank over there, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's like someone's pitching an idea and they just have like one product. They're like, well, where's the development? Where's the roadmap for this? I find it so true because it's so much about this advocacy piece. That's about relationships, right? You want to feel like you're in a safe pair of hands. We're going to invest with these guys, but they're going to grow with us because people grow together or they grow apart. And it's the same with companies. So unless you want to become a point solution, which very quickly gets binned when things change, understanding that with customers, building that kind of relationship with them, that they feel like their feedback is being taken on board, it's fundamental. Because otherwise, if someone else does that and you don't, then you're immediately going to be put in the bin.
Yeah, I think it's important, right? So I think a lot of decision makers it's easier for them to put their money on established technologies, right? It's easy to say, I'm going to go spend money with an AWS or a GCP or whoever else, because even if it doesn't work out, you can say like, hey, everybody else did it. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for us. Let's start again. But if you go put your money in a small startup compared to a larger company that might have something similar, but not as great, and it doesn't work out, they'd be like, hey, why did you waste that money? Right. So people are going to be more afraid to put their neck on the line because they don't truly understand that you are going to be a partner, and a partnership that revolves around the customer experience aspect of it, the product roadmap aspect to it, and then that long-term value aspect to it.
Yeah. Interesting. It's really interesting. We hear all the time from if you talk about enterprise customers, right? And obviously this is the famous saying, you never get fired for buying IBM. But if you buy IBM, they're not going to change their product because of what one customer says. It probably has to be a huge amount of revenue for any kind of change to happen. But startups can beat these bigger companies if they have that piece, right? So I guess how true would this be? Is it a massive competitive advantage for startups that they can play this new modern role of breaking down silos and reimagining the role of revenue organizations to beat these safer bets that companies might have in bigger organizations?
Yeah, I think it helps the company be more agile. I think you could pivot a lot quicker to kind of the market conditions. And most startups have a very short runway, like maybe 18 months, 24 months to really make their mark and grow, and then continue to show that progress to then, the investors to say, okay, great, let's go for that next round.
Yeah.
So I think that cross-functional collaboration is really, really important, right?
Yeah.
If everybody's aligned, okay, hey, something didn't work, let's pivot, or something worked really, really great, let's go all into it, right? But here's how the market's going to shift in the next 6, 8, 10 months, and have you thought about that? Everybody's aligned, because that takes into account, okay, product's going to make some changes to it. Marketing is ready to get the messaging out at the right time. The sales organization is prepared to start building into the conversations already before that pivot happens to kind of, smoothen this aspect of it. A lot of times what happens is products were pivoting and then everybody else is reactive rather than proactive in their conversations, right? When you're reactive, then everybody's playing catch up. And when you're playing catch up, you just try to put stuff out there without truly understanding it. And I think, again, breaks the messaging you're trying to get out to the broader world.
Makes sense. And obviously people listening to this might be at various stages. They might know they have a problem, or they might just have some symptoms which are showing that there is a problem. So what are those like very clearly defined problems that you expect as someone who does have these gaps, who hasn't yet brought in this new way of reimagining the revenue organization? What are some of the really clear, distinct problems that they're going to be facing today?
I think you have to kind of take a look at, are you resonating with your prospects and your customers, right? What does your deal velocity look like? Are you having growth challenges, right? And if you're having growth challenges, why do you have growth challenges, right? There can be a myriad of reasons, internal or external, as to why the growth challenges exist, but then you have to have a lot of introspection. You have to be self-aware as an organization as to where the gaps potentially could be or where the strengths are, right? So I think having these silos, the customer journey aspect of it will be very evident, because you either have retention issues, you either have acquisition issues, or you just have an awareness issue. Like, nobody knows your brand.
Sure. Makes sense. So let's move on to talking about this cross-functional collaboration across revenue team. So just break that down for us. So when you talk about cross-collaboration, which departments are involved in that? Give me a bit of an idea around how that all glues together.
I think most departments, I know it sounds too easy of an answer, or too broad of an answer, maybe even, right? But I'll give you a couple of different examples. So I think there has to be significant collaboration between product marketing, and the marketing organization, right? And in my experiences, I've been at companies where I've kind of seen a disconnect in that area. Like, the product team does something, the product marketing team is too reliant on the product team, and then marketing just puts out whatever they've been asked to put out. So, for example, if a new release or a new version of the product's coming out with new features and functionalities, right? I think it's okay to hold each other accountable to say, hey, why does this matter, right? I have seen product teams put out a new version with new feature capabilities because they heard it from like that one customer in a conversation, right? Sure. Without truly understanding, hey, can we scale this out? And then when they do that, there's a lot of effort and resource that goes into talking about that new version by both marketing and the sales organizations. But is that going to do a couple of things? Is that going to help me get new customers? Is it going to help me expand my footprint in existing customers? Is it going to help me retain customers that might be, hanging by a thread, for example? So you have to ask those questions early on. And in the last 18 years, between where I was part of the company to my advisory roles, I've seen that break, right? So new version came out and nobody could really explain what value it's going to bring to the customer, right? So if the product team had an internal conversation, hey, here's what we're thinking, here's why we believe this is the right roadmap, get some feedback, both from a customer perspective and from the customer-facing organization, especially the CSM organization, right? Because they're in there in the trenches, making the product or solution work for the customer. Yeah. They might get some different answers, right? So I think that collaboration has to be there. There has to be cross-functional alignment between marketing and sales, obviously, right? It's not like, hey, we're just going to rely on marketing to send us some leads. We're going to do our own outbound, like, go-to-market strategy, and hopefully that will work. I think you have to understand is how much role marketing is going to play in driving pipeline, what that delta looks like, and then what is the sales going to take ownership of, or vice versa, right? The numbers are built, and that will impact how you kind of build your numbers, what you share with the C-suite, what the C-suite shares with the board on how you're going to be driving the business and growing the numbers, right? You can say, hey, we need to do $10 million this year, for example, for a smaller startup. But is that even realistic based on what we're seeing and our ability to build that pipeline, our ability to interact with prospects, our ability to close those deals in a timely fashion, depending on what the sales cycle is, right? And we talked about the sales cycle earlier, where can we figure out a way to reduce it, right? Then let's talk about the cross-functional collaboration between sales and post-sales, which is the customer success or the services team. I think it's really important. And different companies do it differently. Some companies will be like, hey, the sales team's going to stay engaged post-sale. Some go like, you're going to hand it off, a brand new team takes over. I'm not a big proponent of like, hey, a brand new team takes over, right? I think it disconnects somebody who's been on this journey for anywhere from like 3 months to a year and building that relationship with the decision makers and the champions, and suddenly to just disconnect. Then what happens when it's time from an expansion perspective, right? Who takes that relationship over? When you release a new product, when you release new capabilities, right? Who does the upsell, right? I think it's important to have that streamlined as well and not have that break. So I feel like this break happens where suddenly the sales team has sold and left, and it's happened to me. I was an IC at a company where I just joined into this new role, and I went to an existing customer, and it was a 1 hour session, and I got yelled at for 1 hour. I've been at the company for a month, go to my first customer meeting, existing customer, to introduce myself saying, hey, I'm going to be taking, and helping out. And all I thought was yelling. And, they were yelling at me because we were promised XYZ. None of it's happening. And I just sat there, and at the end of it, I was like, hey, you shared these 5 problems as to what was promised to you. 4 of the problems are easily fixed because those feature functionality exist in a product. Right. And here's how you go about doing it. But that communication was never, ever there.
Sure.
Because there was a break in somebody sold them the product, somebody implemented the product, and then they just left.
Yeah.
Right. So that cross-functional journey needs to be there where post-sales gets engaged during the POC cycle or towards the end of that sales cycle to understand what they're going to be going and doing at a specific customer site, and vice versa, where sales teams continues to maintain and manage and see kind of what's happening post-sales as well, and have those touch points. It's like, are you deriving the value that you hope to derive out of it? Yes,
Sure.
great. How much? Then you start quantifying it. Once you start quantifying it, the value that's being driven, whether it's in relationship to savings, efficiency, hours, whatever it may be, but clear defined metrics, you can leverage your metrics in 2 ways. You go back and start helping build that awareness advocacy, saying, hey, here's the savings we can show people, here's what we bring to the table, and clear set metrics that our customers see. Secondly, you're enabling the customer to justify leveraging you and the cost of your solution internally because it's clear cut, right? And then you're driving that growth that way.
Interesting. I just wonder, like this, this is so deeply ingrained that this is the way that salespeople are. You have hunters and farmers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you have your hunters acquisition, you have your farmers on existing accounts, account management, cross-sell, upsell. Did you see that? Is that changed? What's your view on how the hunter-farmer thing has changed or evolved?
I think it depends on where the company is in their journey. And a lot of the larger companies still probably have that differentiation between hunter and just account managers. But if you look at even in the larger companies, from my knowledge, I spent 10 years at Oracle, there's no hunter and there's no farmer. Like, you're responsible for it. You're going to drive it from start to end. It's extremely competitive internally and externally from an Oracle standpoint. So yeah, a lot of people might find that to be, not to their liking, but I believe that I don't think you necessarily differentiate that. Right.
I just wonder, in that world, so let's say that is the old school world, and obviously maybe that was a very forward thinking company, hence why they've done so incredibly well. But were you told in that scenario, you catch it, you kill it, it's yours, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, once you built it, it's yours. Or was it because you had a large company, you already took over an existing book of revenue? You took over some existing accounts, whereas in a startup, maybe you don't have that penetration. You don't have those existing accounts. What's your view on that?
No, so even if you, like, in a large company, obviously, you're going to walk into a role where you're going to have existing customers because, somebody left, there's, attrition, somebody new comes in and you take that business on. And I think the sales motion is going to be very different. It's going to be more about upsell and cross-sell and things like that, and going to different business units within that large enterprise. From a startup standpoint, a lot of it's just acquisition as well. But I think it's even more important in startups to be part of that journey throughout, right? So now you've signed on 20 customers, 25 customers, and your bandwidth to go hunt is a little bit lower, but that's where the scalability and capacity management comes into play. It's like, great, we're growing, let's go hire more people to go acquire new folks, right? So that's how you scale out. It doesn't, but if you're expecting that somebody signed on 25 customers and you expect them to sign on 25 more, then and have somebody completely different manage the existing customers, I still think it's disruptive.
Sure.
right?
Sure.
You're asking somebody you need to come in and start owning a relationship. Not that
Yeah.
they can't, that, you have your TAMs and your CSMs own that relationship, but you got to have that from a sports analogy standpoint, your quarterback, right, in American football to make sure everybody's managing their roles. And if you don't have that quarterback, then you have no view of who's doing what in a meaningful manner.
Mm.
Right. And that's where, again, where silos become a little bit disruptive, is because then, product team has no idea what's going on here, or the sales team doesn't have any idea what's going on there because the CSM's tackling it. Right. So that feedback breaks. And again, going back to, the customer needing to have multiple touch points during the sales cycle, even post sales, like they don't want to get on like 5 different calls with the same company. They don't want to talk to the CSM about the current implementation. They don't want to talk to the sales guy about what does the expansion look like. They don't want to talk to product to get product feedback. Right. So you need to have that one conversation or that one person managing it all, disseminating information internally. So the information is flowing correctly, right?
Mm.
And the customer is still 1 or 2 interactions, not 3 interactions post-sale and 7 interactions pre-sales.
Yeah. Okay. Makes perfect sense. So, what, in your experience, what are the best strategies to build that culture of collaboration and shared goals between different departments and different teams?
I mean, people matter, right? And I think it's a top-down approach. So the executive leadership has to buy into it and has to drive that, right? As you scale up, it becomes harder to continue to drive that because you do get bogged down with running your day-to-day operations. So I think you have to have these checkpoints, whether you do it monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, whatever works for your organization at that point, to say, hey, are we aligned? Are we having open conversations? You have to have, I think I talked about it around recruitment in my last podcast about an open feedback loop, right? And feedback loop is a two-way, you're both talking to about what's working, what's not working. So if you keep that open dialogue and conversation going, and you enable that conversation to happen at all levels of the organization, I think that's what works.
Sure.
Right. It won't work if just the leadership team is talking, but nobody under is talking, or it won't work if like only, the ICs are talking, but the leadership team isn't talking. So it comes down to building that into your culture. Right.
Yeah.
It's identifying what kind of a company we are, what kind of emotion we want to drive, how do we want to interact with our customers, what does that mean for us, and how do we define the customer journey? A lot of startups focus very heavily on the acquisition piece, and they don't think through what comes after the acquisition piece, right? So you have to outline your customer journey as you envision it. There's going to be tweaks along the way as you grow, as you scale. Everybody has to say, yeah, we believe this is what it looks like, and this is the role each and every person is going to play in that. And that could be either through formalized SLAs in cross-functional engagement, or it could be something a little bit more loosey-goosey in the sense that, hey, there's buy-in, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to hold you accountable to a specific metric associated with it. It just depends on the culture of the company.
What sort of SLAs would you put in place, or would you recommend that people could look at?
If there's interdependencies to say, hey, we need the product team involved with X, Y, and Z, let's not take a week to get back. Like, we understand that it can't be the day off, but maybe it's a 24-hour turnaround or 48-hour turnaround, but then everybody buys into it.
Mm-hmm.
So the product team was like, great, I have 48 hours to respond to this or be engaged in this conversation. The sales team or the solutions engineer sets the expectation with the customer. It's not like, hey, we'll get back to you right away. It's like, hey, it's going to take us this time. So the customer has the right expectation as to when they can expect the responses or the conversation to happen, right? So it takes that ambiguity off of, oh, let me schedule something or let me do this, right? Because that uncertainty also causes a lot of friction internally when if it's set in place. I mean, there's always going to be caveats to that rule, right? Unique situations. But then if everybody understands what the expectations are, then you're not going to go like, oh, they're not helping me out, right? They don't want to help me, so then I don't want to help them. Kind of a situation arises as much as we don't want to talk about it, but that's the nature of the beast.
Yeah, makes sense. So, and we talked about product and sales. I'd like to get into that one a bit more. One of the biggest things I hear, and it's obviously my perspective is from a talent perspective. So it's either from businesses who are frustrated with the way that things are working today, or it's with people who have been in situations they didn't really love and are looking to avoid those situations in the future. So I'm very acutely aware of things that people tell me that they were annoyed about and they didn't go well. One of the biggest things is the product wasn't ready. So, and then, or if it's someone in the operational side of the business, is, we were churning customers, the type of deals was bad, our net promoter score was poor, we weren't where we needed to be in terms of our net dollar retention, all these things. So in this modern world, where you've got products more involved earlier in the sales cycle, how does that solve this pain that sales, who might be heavily targeted and KPI'd on just winning business, regardless of the shape, and they might sell things and set expectations with customers that actually we can't deliver yet, or maybe they've got information from the business in terms of their training around what the product can do, but the reality is it's different. So can you talk through how does this solve those pains that sales feel that the product wasn't ready and they couldn't sell it?
Yeah, there might be a little bit of sales bias that might come into this discussion, unfortunately. So there's a couple of things, right? I think you have to look at both teams, honestly. Is sales over promising, under delivering? That's always a case that happens in smaller companies. And is it that the expectation wasn't set right? Right. So as the product matures, we can do these two things right now, but these three other things will be available in the next 15 months. So was that messaging clear in that internal communication as well, or external communication, right? Now there's the marketing speak and there's the realism speak, right? So it's really, really important to make sure that when you're actually having a conversation, you're not doing the marketing speak. You have to have what is available and what we can do today. And it's a journey, right? So when some folks go like, oh, but they need everything to really purchase us. What my feedback to my sales teams have been is like, nobody implements each and every functionality on day one. It's a process for them, right? It matures. They're like, okay, great, we'll get this value now. Within 3 months, we'll get the additional value, but within then we'll get, there. So if you're able to set those expectations and draw out that timeline where everybody signs off on ahead of time, then you should be able to, in most cases, avoid this issue of like the product isn't ready, right? Yeah. And then you also have to have that dialogue with the product team to say, that's where the cross-functional collaboration drives internal accountability, right? So communication is clear, you're invested in each other's success, and you're dependent on each other's success. The product team has to deliver, sales team has to deliver. Right. So then the accountability comes to where the product team can't go like, oh yeah, we promised to deliver it in the third quarter, but it's going to now be the first quarter of the next fiscal year. No, that doesn't work anymore. Right. Sure. And that happens as well. Now that can happen in some extreme circumstances, if even when you're extremely well aligned. But, I think that is a one-off and it's more manageable than, so you have to hold that accountability piece internally cross-functionally as well. Yeah. So that's how you probably can address the product isn't ready, right? Not doing the marketing speak, but a realistic speech.
Makes sense. And then if we talk about, obviously we talked about startups and scale-ups. Let's talk about startups. So a very common part of the investment journey that we would get involved in, and certainly maybe some of what Rachel like you entail with the consultation and the design and the strategy side, would be as a business is transitioning from founder-led sales to bringing in this professional sales management layer and salespeople. And one of the things that I see quite often is that when it's a founder selling, not only are they selling to their network, so they have a different kind of relationship, but also their ability to affect the product based on what the client need is much, much higher. And when you shift to professional sales management and you shift to salespeople selling it on behalf, and often going out to the wider market where you don't have a reputation, there's quite a jar in terms of the way that those people have to sell. They can't do what the founder did. What's your experience of that, of businesses who are transitioning from founder-led sales to someone else, and the problems that you see that causes?
Yeah, so I think it comes down, I think it's an excellent question, and I'm tackling that currently with some of the companies that I advise at this moment in time. I think the first question is, at what point do you start investing in sales leadership? Not necessarily, I think founder-led sales can still have salespeople that you hire from a go-to-market standpoint, and they kind of learn along with the founder, depending on the size of the deal, the complexity of the deal, and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But what I usually tell founders not to add to their plate is think through how this is going to scale out, and are you building the foundation and putting in place for somebody to come in and just kind of build on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have the right foundation around collaboration, conversation, how you go to market, from the very start, when you start looking for sales leadership, you'll ask those questions ahead of time. So you won't hire somebody, completely opposite to how you want to run the business.
Sure.
I mean, you want to be open to new ideas, but you'll say, hey, here's the foundation we built. Here's the structure we built. What gaps do you see? Or how would you improve on this? Or how would you, make it grow faster based on what we built, right? So those conversations happen early on. It's not purely just based on the sales leader's experience. It's like, oh, great, you grew that company from like 10 million to 100 million. Fantastic. I think you can do the same for us. I think a lot of things matter. People matter, culture matters, the go-to-market motion matters, the product space matters, right? So just because you were able to scale a company here, it's not you couldn't scale the company here, but could you do it as seamlessly as your previous experiences? So all of that gets taken into account as to how you started building up, right? So you have to start building. I'll tell you, we talked about MakingRevenueTick, where you mentioned MakingRevenueTick earlier, I believe, in the conversation. It's funny how, founder-led sales has been done a certain way. They've hired their salespeople. Now they're at a scale of like, okay, hey, we're at like 7-8 million ARR, give or take, or maybe even a little bit less. Now we're going to hire a sales leader, and they have to come in and implement MakingRevenueTick. MakingRevenueTick isn't just for salespeople. MakingRevenueTick is something that gets used across the organization, right? So everybody has to speak the speak. So if everybody has to speak around MakingRevenueTick, why does it have to be an afterthought when a sales management manager gets hired? Why not put it in place when it's founder-led sales, right? So if you start putting that in motion and you start building a team out, everybody starts getting used to like, this is what the norm looks like. So nothing is throwing when somebody new comes in, right? The goal for somebody new is to improve on things that already exist, right? And hopefully not have to completely gut it and redo it because it was done absolutely wrong, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's where that pivot, like I asked the founders, is like, great, how are you doing it, right? And when any founder, CEO says, hey, I need you to operationalize MakingRevenueTick for me, I said, that involves just not the sales team. That involves you as a CEO, somebody as a COO, whoever is involved in kind of the revenue aspect of it needs to speak the same language, right? And if you're not speaking the same language, don't expect your team to do it.
Sure. Yeah, it's a really interesting point. Really interesting point. What are some of do you have a great example of a business that's done that transition really well from founder-led sales to the professional sales management layer, and what they did that made it successful?
I do. I'm being thoughtful of like how much information I can share.
Yeah, you can do it without name if you want, but just make it.
So no, there is one where I did a couple of different things, right? I think understanding what the emotion looks like is really important. So I was working with a founder very early on in their journey. And obviously they were doing founder-led sales. They were having certain issues, not coming from a sales background. So I was introduced to them and I was helping them through negotiating, understanding what kind of questions to ask.
Yeah.
It's easy to give up too much when you're like, even as a founder-led sales, because you want to bring in those customers. So, I started kind of not necessarily saying, hey, you're going to be doing MedPick, but starting putting some of those structures in place for him. So everybody else that came in after the fact bought into that idea that this is how this company is run. One of the other things I advised them to do was as to when to hire sales team and the sales leader, right? Because sometimes there's a push by investors to say, oh, you want to grow, go hire 5 salespeople and experienced salespeople, right? See really senior salespeople, done this and have grown the business, go hire 5 people and you'll be fine.
Sure.
And even though that was the guidance he got from the investors, and I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this, I was like, please don't. Right? Your business model does not support you to go hire 5 new salespeople, right?
Sure.
And that's taking into account existing pipeline, inbound conversations, outbound conversations, what the structure look like, how long the sales cycle is, and who you need to do that, right? And fortunately, we took it slow, and over a period of time, we scaled in the right manner, right? And now they've hired a sales leader. I was there from a transitionary standpoint for about 3 to 5 months once the sales leader came back on board to kind of like, do it together aspect to it. And then I kind of stepped back, and now, they're thriving, they're growing exponentially year over year. So they're doing a fantastic job.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. And then one more thing, before we wrap this up, I'm really interested to understand. So as a business is scaling and moving from the startup to scale up phase, the stories of successful customers, your heroes, your case studies, your advocates are so powerful in being able to build trust and therefore, grow your business effectively. What's a great example you've seen of a business who has taken the success stories that they've achieved with customers and helped it to create the foundations to reach that next level of scale?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. And my viewpoint on that is I think there's a very organic way to do that. I think a lot of companies still approach is like, great, we have a success story. Let's go ask if they're ready to do a video recording for us, or we can use them to just go put something like a blog or a case study on our website.
Sure.
It goes back to that advocacy piece, right? If you're involved in that journey, you're advocating like the value of the solution. There's thought leadership happening. Now, when you sign up your first few customers, there's going to be that one marquee customer where your relationship is absolutely fantastic.
Sure.
And they are seeing immense value from your solution. They're really happy with the relationship. And at that point, you start leveraging your customers from a thought leadership and an advocacy standpoint. And it might not be in relationship to, hey, let's put a video out there, but it could be a private exclusive event where you invite like-minded people. Right. So I'm a big proponent of what's called doing these roundtables, thought leadership roundtables.
Sure.
Right. So it's like, okay, great. We have 2 customers. Can you invite somebody we'll invite somebody we know. And the conversation isn't about the product itself, but it's about the space and the value that needs to be derived in that space, whether it's DevOps, security, risk compliance, AI, whatever it may be, as to where the trends may be going. You get different viewpoints. You share the pain points and the challenges. And then hopefully that gives you an opportunity to say how were those challenges resolved as a result of leveraging your solution. So it's not necessarily like a heavily sales focused conversation. It's more of a technical thought leadership conversation. And suddenly they go like, great, you did it. You're in my shoes. I'm interested in knowing more. And that's how you start growing kind of that emotion. Now it's not like you need 100 people in one go. From a startup standpoint, you start building slowly into it, right? It's 5 people. Maybe it's 10 people the quarter after that. And then a year later, maybe you get to 20, 25 or something like that, right? So it's not like in one go, we're going to get these many people to talk about us. Because that small, intimate, people open up a little bit more. It's a smaller group setting. You're more comfortable speaking about actual challenges rather than the hypothetical situations and how you potentially can go about resolving for those.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Love that idea around creating customer advocacy and round tables around topics and thought leadership. Obviously, the big buzzword right now in the market is community and the go-to network. how do you see the role of community? And everyone wants to build a community around their solution and their company and their products. How do you see that role of community and a
I think
go-to model being effective in 2024?
I think that's one of the most important questions that we're going to talk about today. More, I think community is really, really important because it drives that, call it organic growth for you, right? So if you are enabling your community, you have to have certain programs in place to enrich and nurture that community. So the simplest example I can give you is somebody's used your product, they found a lot of value in it, right? Very few people are lifers in a company these days. They want career growth and professional growth. So they'll move around, go into a net new environment. And rather than you go try, getting in the door, it should be this person, you have a relationship, goes in there and does your selling for you. You say, here's a product, here's a value, here's a company that has this amazing journey. It's seamless. It's not very salesy, if I can put it in those terms.
Sure.
Right. So that community is really, really important, right? And the community is also important because they're sharing feedback, there's growth that's involved in them, and they're helping you and your product evolve as a result of the changing environment, the competitive landscape, or whatever it may be. So I think community is really, really important. And I think community can also be distributed at various levels, right? You can have the user community that use your product day in, day out, understand all the nuances, the challenges of simple things of integration to use or features or functionality, and give you a lot of that feedback.
Yeah.
But you also should be able to build a community that speaks to, again, kind of driving the business value for your customers, right? One aspect is the technical value, one aspect is the business value. It's great that the users might see a lot of value out of it, but the decision makers who have to write the check have to be able to justify from a financial standpoint as to the impact it has, not only from a technical standpoint, but a business standpoint, right? Sure. So, hey, by leveraging this software, we are more efficient. We have more engineering hours. We have less firefights. We're more proactive than reacting and solving for problems. And we save $1 million a year. But in addition to do that, we're enabling our application teams to push out new feature functionality and new releases for our end customers, which is making us more endearing to our end customers. So we're able to upsell, cross-sell, expand more. So our revenue is directly impacted by that. So right, those are the different levels of conversation. It's just not about cost savings and efficiency and things like that. It's like, here's a direct impact to our revenue line or whatever else maybe, or risk and compliance aspect to it, right?
Yeah. Nice.
So that community has to be built at that level. So what we did really well at Puppet was we did two things. We had what was called a technical advisory board, where we would have the product team and the sales engineering team engage with the users or frontline management teams on the technical aspect of where the product should be heading and the trends and where the industry is going. And we had what was called the customer advisory board, which spoke about more the high level aspects of the value that could be derived and put into business terms, right? Sure. So I don't think you do that very early on from a startup standpoint, but as you start scaling, I think that's a great conversation to have. And even if you don't have an official program around it, I think you can do an unofficial program around it.
Sure. Is community for everyone?
I can't think of a use case where it wouldn't be. I'm not saying that it is, but I can't think of one where it wouldn't be.
Yeah, okay. Let's say final thing because we're probably way over time. But let's say you were a founder and you really wanted a community and you knew about all the value that you could bring your business. What's the first thing that you should do to start on that journey towards creating a community?
I can probably hypothesize. I haven't done it, so it's hard for me to say, hey, here's exactly what you do. I've never built a community. I've probably been an advocate of nurturing an existing community. But I think it's open dialogue, right? And it's taking as much feedback, being open to the good and the bad, and driving success for them, right? Your community is dependent on them seeing value out of it. So drive value for them, however that is defined. But yeah, I don't know if I have a better answer for how you start building a community. But I think you start investing in the people you think are your target audience. And what that also will help, hopefully down the line, is it helps you define what your ICP looks like. Who are the people who are going to actually respond to who we are, right? So maybe you start targeting your potential ICP based on what you've hypothesized, and then through trial and error, maybe you get it really in front of the right people who will help you grow.
Makes total sense. And your answer is excellent, because you talk about the value of community. You can easily say you've got like this network of people that you can sell through, these advocates, but it's not this sales network that you can activate. It's people that you've got a level of trust with, because you've taken the time to listen about what's broken. So when you're building a community, I guess there's two big sides to it. One is absolutely through building a community, we want to understand people well enough that they do love us, but you're going to face a load of stuff that you don't like, and you're going to hear a bunch of things that you don't like, because that's the very value of it. You're creating a safe space where people can share the bad stuff as well as the good stuff. And ultimately from that, you will grow into creating something that's largely people that love what you do and feel valued and feel supported. So I think the way you describe it is perfect.
Yeah, I'll probably wrap up with this comment. I think it's one of the hardest things for technical teams or founders to kind of take feedback. I think it's for any individual to hear that your baby's ugly. And your baby might not be ugly day one, but maybe 24 months later, maybe it's not looking so great. So let's do something about it.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. Perfect. And let's say someone's watched all of this, Kartik, and they would love to know more from you. I know that you've got a bunch of things that you're focused on right now, and you might not necessarily have a load of spare capacity to be able to go and help everyone that wants to be helped. But what's the best way someone could get in contact with you if they wanted to get some specific help and feedback?
I think LinkedIn's probably the best way at this moment in time. I've got profiles right there for everybody to see. Just Kartik Gade. If you search on LinkedIn, you'll come across that profile. Send me a message. I'm happy to engage and have a conversation. And maybe there's people who can help me go have my perspective on that situation as well, based on their experiences, right? So I think it's about constant growth and constant enablement and evolving with the marketplace. So I'm always looking for similar ideas or new ideas, and just having a very open dialogue about it.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much for giving up so much of your time to talk about this topic. I'm so glad that we made it happen. So very much appreciated.
No, thank you. Hopefully people find value in it, and it's interesting. I've been spending a lot of time thinking about how go-to-market's changing, right? And it is evolving and continues to evolve. And I've spent the last 2 to 3 months ideating as to how I would approach, growing and scaling out a business.
Sure.
And a lot of that is core focus for me right now, as I do work with founders and early stage startups to help them through that, and they're diverse in their product portfolio.
Sure.
So it gives me an opportunity to kind of think through what the new way of going to market is.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we check back in the year and see how right our hypothesis was, and how far outdated it's become.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time, and thank you everyone for listening. It's been a pleasure, and we'll see you on the next episode.